Welcome. Let your shoulders sink into whatever is holding you right now, and let your eyes rest, even if they are already closed. There is nowhere to arrive tonight, only a long, slow walk backward through stone and centuries. Tonight we travel to a valley carved into rose-colored rock, hidden between cliffs in the desert of southern Jordan. Nothing here needs to be remembered. You may simply listen and drift, as the past opens like a very old door. Petra sits inside a sandstone valley carved by ancient tectonic rifting. Long before any city rose here, the earth itself pulled apart along a great fault line running through the land. Slabs of rock shifted against one another over unimaginable stretches of time. The valley floor dropped, the walls lifted, and a natural corridor formed between towering stone. Wind and water would later shape what the shifting earth had first opened. The sandstone of Petra formed over 500 million years before the first human hand touched it. Layer upon layer of ancient sand settled beneath long-vanished seas, pressed slowly into rock by the sheer weight of time. Each band of stone holds a memory of some forgotten shoreline or riverbed. The cliffs that travelers now walk beneath were already unfathomably old when the earliest fish swam in early oceans. The Wadi Musa Valley was shaped by flash floods over countless millennia. Rare desert rains gathered swiftly and rushed downhill, cutting narrow channels through soft rock. Season after season, storm after storm, the water carved deeper into the stone. What began as a faint crack in the cliffs slowly widened into passageways wide enough for travelers, animals, and eventually cities to pass through. The region's rock layers show vivid natural color banding from mineral deposits. Streaks of deep red, soft pink, pale yellow, and quiet gray run through the cliffs like slow brushstrokes. Iron and manganese, carried by ancient water, left these colors behind as they seeped through porous stone. Even without carving or ornament, the rock itself already held a kind of quiet artistry, waiting. The surrounding highlands rise dramatically, creating a natural desert fortress. Steep ridges and stone plateaus encircle the valley on nearly every side. From a distance, little of what lies within can be seen at all. This hidden geography would one day shelter merchants, travelers, and kingdoms from the harsher winds of history outside its walls. Early hunter-gatherers occupied the area as far back as the Paleolithic era. Small bands moved through these highlands, following seasonal water and game. They left behind flint tools, worked stone blades, and the faint traces of hearths pressed into old soil. Their lives left barely a mark upon the land, yet the record of their passing still lies buried beneath later layers of dust. Neolithic settlers built one of the world's earliest agricultural villages nearby, at a place called Bida. Round stone houses stood clustered together, their walls plastered smooth with mud. Families kept early domesticated goats and grew simple grains in small terraced plots. The rhythms of planting and harvest were only just beginning to replace the old rhythms of wandering. Bida predates Petra itself by thousands of years. Its stone foundations were already crumbling back into the hillside long before the first carved facade appeared nearby. The village stands as a quiet reminder that people had learned to build, to plant, and to stay in one place here long before any city took shape in the valley beyond. Edomites controlled the region before the Nabateans arrived. This settled kingdom held the highlands and trade paths for generations, worshipping their own gods and burying their dead in hillside tombs. Their name still lingers in old texts, remembered mostly through fragments and border disputes recorded by neighboring peoples. Little else survives to tell their story in their own words. The Edomite kingdom left fortresses in the surrounding highlands. Thick stone walls once guarded narrow mountain passes, watching over roads that merchants and shepherds still use in some form today. Time has worn most of these fortresses down to low outlines in the earth, yet their placement still marks where the old borders of a forgotten kingdom once stood watch over the valley below. Nomadic tribes known as the Nabateans began moving into this region from the deserts of Arabia. They came as herders and traders, following seasonal water sources across vast open country. Their wagons carried tents, woven goods, and small herds of camels and goats. Over generations, these wandering groups grew familiar with every hidden spring and hollow in the surrounding hills. Written communication among these newcomers took shape in Aramaic, the common trade language of the ancient Near East. Merchants scratched simple accounts onto pottery shards and stone. Aramaic letters, borrowed and adapted, eventually shaped a distinct Nabatean script. That same alphabet would later leave traces in scripts still used across the region today. Records naming the Nabateans first appear in the 4th century before the Common Era. Greek historians mention them briefly, describing a desert people skilled in trade and difficult to conquer. Details from this early period remain thin, pieced together from scattered mentions rather than full accounts. Even so, these fragments mark the earliest moment this people steps into written history. An invasion led by the Macedonian general Antigonus, the first reached this territory in the year 312 before the Common Era. His forces attacked a Nabatean stronghold, hoping to seize their accumulated wealth. The Nabateans withdrew into rugged terrain, then struck back and reclaimed their losses. Greek chroniclers recorded the episode as proof of how fiercely this desert people defended their home. Settlement eventually centered on a narrow canyon carved deep into sandstone cliffs. Its winding, hidden entrance made the location nearly impossible for outsiders to find without guidance. Steep rock walls rose on every side, shielding the valley from wind, sun, and unwanted visitors alike. This natural fortress offered protection no open plain could ever provide. The name Petra comes from an ancient Greek word meaning rock. Visitors from the Mediterranean world used this term to describe the settlement's dramatic stone surroundings. The name stuck, appearing in later Greek and Roman writings about the region. Long after its original founders were gone, this borrowed word remained the city's most enduring label. Long before Petra became its common name, the Nabateans called their city Rakhmu. This original name appears in a handful of surviving inscriptions carved into rock faces nearby. Its exact meaning remains uncertain, discussed but never fully settled among linguists studying the Nabatean tongue. The older name faded from common use once Greek and Roman visitors adopted their own term instead. Wealth flowed into this desert stronghold through control of the incense trade route stretching north from southern Arabia. Nabatean guides and guards escorted merchant caravans across hundreds of kilometers of open desert. Safe passage was never free. Payment came in the form of tolls, food, water rights, and lodging fees. Over time, this control over movement built the foundation of the city's growing fortune. Loads of frankincense and myrrh moved directly through Petra's narrow canyon on their way toward Mediterranean ports. These fragrant resins, harvested far to the south, were prized across the ancient world for temples, medicine, and burial rites. Merchants paused here to rest animals, restock supplies, and pay required tolls before continuing north. The scent of these resins would have lingered faintly along the well-worn trade paths. Petra grew into a crossroads, joining Arabia, Egypt, and the wider Mediterranean world. Goods, ideas, and travelers passed through its gates from every direction, mixing languages and customs within its narrow streets. Egyptian linen, Arabian spices, and Greek pottery could all be found within the same marketplace. This constant exchange shaped Petra into something far larger than its remote desert location might first suggest. Let the weight of the body settle now. deeper into the mattress with every breath out. Feel your feet grow heavy first, then your calves, then your knees, sinking as though the day itself has finally set them down. Let that heaviness climb through your hips, your chest, your shoulders, until even your fingers feel too tired to curl. There is only this weight now, and the bed holding it, and nowhere it needs to go. Taxation of passing caravans became the quiet engine of Nabatean fortune. Every merchant train that entered the canyon paid for water, for lodging, for the right to move goods safely onward. Guards stationed along the route collected these fees in coin, in kind, sometimes in goods themselves. Over generations, these small payments accumulated into a wealth that funded the carving of an entire city from stone. A narrow gorge called the Sick serves as the main threshold into Petra. Travelers on foot or camel entered through this natural fissure, walls rising high on either side until daylight narrowed to a ribbon overhead. The passage feels less like a road than a corridor carved by some patient force of water and time. Even now, its shadowed stone holds the cool air of morning long into the afternoon. Stretching more than a kilometer, the Sick winds between rock walls before finally opening onto the city itself. The path bends repeatedly, hiding what lies ahead until the very last turn. Merchants moving through would have heard their own footsteps echo strangely against stone worn smooth by centuries of passage. No single view reveals Petra's presence until the gorge releases its grip entirely. Channels cut directly into the 6 stone walls once carried water safely through the gorge. Nabatean engineers shaped these grooves with careful precision, guiding rainfall away from the footpath below. Fragments of these channels still trace the rock today, faint lines running alongside where travelers once walked. Their design reflects a people who understood the desert's sudden violence toward water long before modern engineers arrived to study it. An elaborate dam once stood at the Sick's entrance, built to divert sudden flash floods away from the gorge. Desert storms could send walls of water rushing through the narrow passage within minutes of a distant downpour. This structure redirected that danger into a separate tunnel, sparing both the roadway and the travelers moving through it. Its stones, though altered by time, still mark the spot where engineering first tamed the desert's temper. More than 200 cisterns lie scattered across Petra's hidden corners. Carved into rock or built from fitted stone, these reservoirs stored rainwater collected during the region's brief but forceful storms. Some sat beneath courtyards, others tucked into hillsides far from the city's center. Together they formed a hidden network sustaining life through months when no rain fell at all. 20,000 residents, by modern estimation, once depended on this careful water system. Such a population in the heart of a desert required more than luck. It demanded planning down to the smallest channel and jar. Bathhouses, gardens, and fountains all drew from this same carefully managed supply. Petra's survival rested less on abundance than on discipline in how every drop was gathered and used. Centuries before Rome perfected its own concrete, Nabatean builders had already developed a waterproof cement of their own. This mixture lined cisterns and channels, sealing them against the porous nature of sandstone. Modern chemical analysis has confirmed its durability, some traces surviving in usable form after 2,000 years underground. Their formula, likely built through trial across generations, gave the city a resilience few desert settlements ever achieved. Clay pipes once carried spring water from a source called Ain Musa into the heart of the city. This spring, associated in local tradition with the biblical figure Moses, lies several kilometers from Petra's center. Sections of terracotta piping, still visible in places, once ran the entire distance underground and along cliff faces. This constant flow of fresh water freed the city from total dependence on unpredictable rainfall alone. Rain fell rarely across this desert, but when it came, Nabatean engineers were ready for it. Every rooftop, courtyard, and hillside slope was studied for the way water might travel across it. Small channels guided runoff toward buried cisterns, rather than letting it vanish into sand. Even the steepest terraces were carved with barely visible grooves, turning every storm into stored survival. Somewhere beyond the walls, wind moves across open rock, rising and falling like breath. It hums low through unseen gaps, fades, then returns again, never in a hurry. A house settles somewhere in the dark, a single creak swallowed by the night. Let that far-off sound carry you, drifting past, asking nothing, needing nothing in return. Nabatean builders borrowed freely from the worlds around them. Columns echoed Greek temples, doorways carried Egyptian proportions, while the underlying forms remained rooted in Arabian tradition. Traders who moved through Petra carried back more than goods, they carried ideas of proportion, ornament, and design. The result was a style belonging fully to no single empire, yet recognizable across the ancient Mediterranean world. No blocks were stacked to build the treasury's towering face. Instead, workers began at the top of the cliff and cut steadily downward, freeing the facade from raw stone rather than assembling it piece by piece. Scaffolding rose from the base as the carving descended, each level guiding the next below it. What stands today was never built at all, in the ordinary sense, but revealed. Bedouin storytellers gave the treasury its lasting name, al-Hazne, meaning the treasury. The tale spoke of a pharaoh who hid a fortune of gold inside a great stone urn carved above the entrance. No written Nabatean record ever confirmed this story. Yet the name endured, passed down through generations long after the building's original purpose had faded from memory. Above the treasury's central doorway, slender columns rise in the Corinthian order, their capitals wrapped in carved acanthus leaves. This style, born in Greek workshops centuries earlier, had traveled far from its origins by the time it reached this desert canyon. Nabatean stonecutters reproduced the form with striking precision, working stone that offered little room for error. Their skill placed a distant Greek fashion firmly into Arabian rock. Local legend held that a vengeful pharaoh, fleeing pursuit through the desert, sealed his treasure inside the great urn carved high on the treasury's face. Bedouin tribes repeated the story for generations, embellishing it around evening fires. No archaeological evidence has ever linked Petra to Egyptian rule in this way. Still, the tale gave the silent stone a reason to be remembered by travelers who never learned its true history. Generations of hopeful treasure hunters aimed their rifles at the stone urn crowning the treasury, believing gunfire might crack it open and spill hidden riches. Chips and pockmarks still scar its surface today, visible proof of centuries of failed attempts. The urn, in truth, is solid rock, carved from the same cliff as the rest of the facade. No gold was ever found, only the marks of long-held hope. Behind the treasury's ornate face lie plain chambers, bare of decoration, cut deep into the rock. Archaeologists now believe these rooms once held royal burials, their simplicity contrasting sharply with the elaborate entrance meant to be seen from the canyon floor. Grave goods and skeletal remains uncovered nearby support this interpretation. The grandeur, it seems, was reserved entirely for those approaching from outside. Across Petra's cliffs and hillsides, more than 800 tombs have been carved into the sandstone. Each varies in size and ornament, from modest niches to towering, multi-story facades. Wealthier families commissioned elaborate designs, while simpler households carved smaller resting places nearby. Walking among them today still shows the scale of a city that built its memory into the very rock surrounding it. A cluster of grand facades rises together along Petra's eastern cliff, known simply as the Royal Tombs. Their scale dwarfs the smaller resting places scattered elsewhere in the city. 4 principal structures stand within close reach of each other, catching the afternoon light in sequence as the sun moves west. Together they mark this stretch of rock as a place reserved for the city's most powerful families. Among these facades, the urn tomb carries a second history layered atop its first. Byzantine Christians converted its wide central chamber into a church centuries after Nabatean builders had finished it. An inscription found within records the date of that transformation. Where royal remains may once have rested, worshippers later gathered beneath the same vaulted ceiling, their voices rising through rock that had already stood for hundreds of years. Let warmth begin now in your hands, spreading slowly across the palms and into each finger. Feel it climb through your wrists, up along your arms, settling into your shoulders like a blanket drawn close. Let it pool there a moment, then drift into your chest, your back, sinking into the mattress beneath you. Wherever this warmth travels, let heaviness follow behind it, one part of you at a time, until sleep finds you resting. Further along the same cliff stands the Corinthian tomb, its facade once crowded with columns and pediments borrowed from classical design. Centuries of wind have worn its upper reaches nearly smooth, blurring capitals that were once sharply carved. Even in this eroded state, traces of elaborate cornices and false doorways remain visible to careful eyes. It stands as a weathered echo of the precision its builders once achieved. Nearby, the palace tomb reaches upward in tiers, its facade arranged to resemble a multi-story Roman building. Rows of engaged columns stack one above another, imitating balconies and windows that were never meant to be entered. No such structure existed anywhere else carved so fully from a single cliff. Travelers passing below often paused simply to count the stacked levels rising into the rock. High above the valley floor, Petra's largest monument waits at the end of a long climb. Called the monastery, or ad-dir in Arabic, its facade surpasses even the treasury in width and height. Its scale becomes clear only when a visitor stands at its base, dwarfed by columns twice the height of a grown man. Wind and isolation have kept its surface remarkably intact across the centuries. Reaching the monastery required climbing roughly 800 rock-cut steps carved into the mountainside. Pilgrims and traders once made this ascent on foot, pausing at carved niches along the way. The path winds past worn shrines and narrow ledges overlooking the valley below. Even today, the climb takes the better part of an hour, slow and steady beneath the open sky. Some archaeologists believe the monastery was never a tomb at all. Its wide-open chamber, lacking burial niches, suggests instead a hall used for royal gatherings or religious feasts. Nabatean kings may have held ceremonial banquets within its walls, honoring deified ancestors through shared meals. The true purpose was never recorded in surviving texts, leaving the question resting quietly within the stone itself. For more than 400 years, a line of Nabatean kings governed from Petra, shaping it from a caravan stop into a capital. Their names survive on coins, inscriptions, and fragments of royal decree. Under their rule, the city expanded outward from the Sikh into temples, tombs, and terraced gardens. Dynastic succession passed steadily from father to son, giving the kingdom a stability rare among its desert neighbors. Under King Aretas IV, Petra reached its fullest architectural flowering. His reign, spanning several decades before the turn of the era, financed many of the city's grandest monuments. Coins bearing his image circulated widely across Nabatean territory. Building projects multiplied under his patronage, from temple expansions to elaborate tomb facades, marking his rule as the high point of the kingdom's prosperity. A Judean princess, once called Petra home before her marriage, brought her into a story recorded in scripture. She was the daughter of King Aretas IV, married briefly to Herod Antipas. Their divorce, mentioned in the New Testament, drew Petra's ruler into a conflict beyond his desert kingdom. The episode links this rock capital, however briefly, to events remembered far beyond Arabia. Coins struck in Petra carried the faces of its kings, rendered in a style borrowed from Greek workshops, profiles in relief, wreathed heads, Greek lettering circling the rim. They mixed Arabian rule with Hellenistic fashion. Merchants across the trade routes would have recognized these small silver and bronze pieces. Each coin, worn smooth by centuries of hands, still carries the outline of a vanished court. Petra's great temple complex spread across nearly 7,000 square meters at the heart of the city. Colonnades framed a central courtyard, leading toward a raised platform once crowned with columns and capitals. And excavators found fragments of painted plaster among the rubble, hinting at once bright walls. The scale of the ruins suggests a building meant to be seen from every approach into Petra. Somewhere beyond the last lamp, a thin fog is settling over still water, so slow it seems not to move at all. Watch it without watching, the way the eye rests on something it doesn't need to hold. Each breath can sink a little further, like a stone easing into soft sand. There's no need to follow the fog anywhere. It simply drifts, and you can drift along beside it, lower and lower, until sleep arrives on its own quiet terms. Inside the great temple's courtyard, builders carved a theater-like structure meant to seat around 600 people. Rows of stone benches curved gently, facing a small stage area used for gatherings or performances. Its placement within a religious complex suggests civic and sacred life were closely woven together in Petra. Visitors today can still trace the worn outline of these seats among the ruins. Petra's largest theater, carved directly into a hillside, once held roughly 8,500 spectators. Tiered rows rose in a wide crescent, cut from solid rock rather than built up from blocks. Sunlight moved across the seats through the day, warming stone worn smooth by generations of visitors. From the highest row, the whole valley of tombs would have spread out below like a painted backdrop. Carving that great theater came at a cost written quietly into the stone itself. Workers cut directly through a row of older tombs to make room for the seating, leaving sliced burial chambers visible along the theater's edges. Archaeologists can still see the truncated doorways and empty niches where those tombs once stood complete. It shows a city willing to reshape its own past to serve its present needs. At the center of Nabatean worship stood Dushara, chief god of the people who built this city. His name appears carved into altars, inscriptions, and betiles scattered across the region. Petra's temples, including its grandest structures, likely honored him above all other deities. Though his image was rarely shown in human form, his presence shaped the rhythm of religious life throughout the kingdom. Dushara was understood as a god of mountains and storms, tied closely to the rugged land he watched over. Nabateans saw his power in thunder rolling across the highlands and in flash floods rushing down desert wadis. Sacred high places atop Petra's peaks may have served as sites for rituals honoring him. His worship reflected a landscape where weather and stone shaped daily survival. Alongside Dushara, the goddess Al-Usa held an important place in Nabatean devotion. Linked to fertility, protection, and the morning star, her worship appears in inscriptions found throughout Petra and beyond. Small shrines and carved niches suggest she received offerings much like other regional goddesses of her era. Her presence reminds us that Petra's spiritual world held many gods, each woven into the rhythms of desert life. Sacrifice held a central place in Nabatean worship, and the people built altars for it high above their homes. These platforms were cut directly into mountain summits, reached by long stairways carved into the rock. Basins nearby likely caught the blood of offerings, channeled away through small grooves in the stone. Priests would have climbed before dawn, leaving the valley below, still wrapped in shadow. One such altar, known today as the high place of sacrifice, crowns a peak looking down over the entire city. Reaching it requires climbing hundreds of rock-cut steps that wind past tombs and narrow ledges. From the summit, the treasury and the theater appear as small, pale shapes far below. Wind moves freely across the exposed stone, carrying the scent of dust and dry thorn. Tall obelisks rise from the bedrock along certain paths, shaped not by stacking blocks but by cutting the rock away around them. Two such pillars stand near the base of the mountain leading to the high place, believed to mark a sacred approach. Their surfaces remain smooth despite centuries of wind. Ceremonial processions may have passed between them on the way toward the summit shrine. Petra's tombs carry a signature the Nabateans made their own, a stepped pattern cut into the upper edge of many facades. Rows of small rectangular notches climb toward the sky like a staircase without steps. No other ancient culture used this exact crenellation in quite the same way. Scholars still debate whether it echoes Assyrian or Persian influence carried along the trade roads and reshaped in local stone. Let your face rest now, the way stone rests after a long day of sun. Let your jaw loosen, unclench, drop just slightly, as though it too has been carrying something it no longer needs to hold. Let your eyelids grow heavy, heavier, until closing them feels less like an act and more like settling. Behind your closed eyes there is only dim, drifting dark, wide and unhurried, asking nothing of you at all. Bowls and cups, shaped by Nabatean hands, were prized far beyond Petra's valley for how little they weighed. Some walls measured only a couple of millimeters thick, thinner than the shell of an egg, yet strong enough to survive centuries buried in sand. Potters achieved this using a fine, well-levigated clay and a mastery of the wheel rarely matched elsewhere in the ancient world. Traders carried these vessels along the same roads that carried frankincense. Painted across those thin walls were patterns unlike anything produced by neighboring cultures: delicate leaves, vines, and geometric borders in reddish-brown pigment. Craftsmen applied the designs before firing, using brushes fine enough to trace individual veins on a painted leaf. Fragments of this pottery have surfaced far from Petra, scattered along old caravan stops across the desert. Each shard still carries a trace of the hand that painted it. Kings ruling from Petra pressed their own likenesses into silver and bronze, minting coins that circulated across the kingdom. Early issues borrowed heavily from Greek styles, showing profile portraits framed by wreaths and lettering. Later coins added Nabatean royal titles alongside queens shown beside their husbands, an unusual choice for the region. These small discs of metal passed through countless hands, paying for grain, wine, and passage through the sick. Goods flowing through Petra's markets had traveled distances that would take modern imagination to measure. Silk arrived by relay from looms far to the east, passing through hands in Central Asia long before reaching Arabian ports. Spices and precious stones came from India, carried across the sea to Yemen and then north by camel. Nabatean merchants served as one link in a chain stretching nearly the width of the known world. From Petra's warehouses, caravans pressed onward toward the Mediterranean coast, carrying silk, spices, and incense in their final stretch of the long journey. Their destination was often Gaza, a harbor town where goods were loaded onto ships bound for Rome, Greece, and beyond. The route took weeks across open desert, guided by wells and way stations the Nabateans maintained. What began in distant India or China ended its overland journey here, at the edge of the sea. Merchants, haggling in Petra's stalls, handled goods drawn from 3 continents at once. A trader might set African ivory beside Chinese silk, with Arabian frankincense stacked nearby in woven sacks. Egyptian glassware sat within arm's reach of Greek pottery, each object having crossed deserts or seas to arrive here. Standing at that crossroads, a single afternoon of trade could touch nearly every known corner of the ancient world. Nabatean rulers understood the value of staying on good terms with the empire growing to their west. Envoys traveled between Petra and Rome, carrying letters, gifts, and careful assurances of loyalty. Nabatean kings sent supplies and troops to assist Roman campaigns when it served their interests. This steady correspondence kept Petra's independence intact for generations, even as Rome swallowed kingdom after kingdom around it. Legions marched through nearly every province bordering Nabatean land, yet Petra itself was never stormed. Its kings paid tribute when required, offered passage when asked, and avoided provoking confrontation with Rome's disciplined armies. The narrow canyon entrance to the city may have discouraged any thought of a costly siege. For nearly 2 centuries, caution and diplomacy accomplished what walls alone could not. In the year 106 of the Common Era, the Nabatean kingdom quietly became a Roman province. No recorded battle marks the transition. The annexation appears to have proceeded through negotiation rather than conquest. The last Nabatean king, Rabel II, had died shortly before, leaving the throne without the friction of open resistance. Roman administrators simply arrived, and Petra's long independence closed without bloodshed. Rome renamed its new territory Arabia Petraea, and Petra itself became its capital city. Roman governors took up residence where Nabatean kings once ruled, administering trade routes and desert garrisons from the same sandstone halls. Latin inscriptions began appearing beside older Nabatean script on public monuments. The city's function shifted, yet its markets, temples, and tombs continued much as before under a new imperial banner. Let your breath grow longer now, each exhale slower than the one before it. Draw air in without effort, and release it as if setting down something you no longer need to carry. With each breath out, feel your shoulders loosen a little further into whatever is holding you. There is no pace to keep, no rhythm to force, only the quiet lengthening of each breath as your body settles into rest. Roman engineers laid a new colonnaded street straight through the heart of the city. Rows of stone columns lined the path, replacing whatever informal thoroughfare the Nabateans had used before. Shops and porticos opened onto this avenue, giving Petra the layout familiar to travelers from any Roman provincial town. Walking its length, a visitor could move from temple to marketplace beneath an unbroken line of carved stone pillars. At the western end of that new avenue, Roman architects raised a triumphal arch spanning the road itself. Passing beneath it marked entry into the ceremonial core of the city, much as similar arches did in Rome or Palmyra. Carved niches once held statues, long since lost to weather and time. Travelers on foot, on horseback, or leading laden camels all passed beneath the same stone threshold. Within this Roman provincial capital lived a mixed population unlike Petra's earlier, more singular Nabatean character. Soldiers garrisoned the surrounding desert forts, protecting trade routes and collecting tolls. Merchants continued arriving from Arabia, Egypt, and beyond, adapting to new taxes and administrators. Roman officials managed records, courts, and correspondence, settling into houses built where Nabatean families had lived for generations before them. Roman builders constructed a bathhouse complex, drawing water through the city's existing network of aqueducts and channels. Hot rooms, cold pools, and changing chambers followed familiar Roman design, adapted to fit Petra's rocky terrain. Nabatean engineering, built centuries earlier for drinking water and irrigation, now also filled marble basins for bathing. The old channels carried new purposes, still carrying water long after the kingdom that built them had passed into Roman hands. Under Emperor Trajan, Rome poured fresh resources into Petra's stonework and roads. New building projects rose across the city, funded by an empire eager to secure its eastern holdings. Masons widened streets, reinforced aqueducts, and added public structures befitting a provincial capital. For a time, imperial attention meant renewed prosperity, and Petra's carved facades gleamed under fresh Roman patronage. Farther north, the city of Palmyra began drawing merchants who once favored Petra's narrow canyon route. Its open desert paths proved easier for larger caravans to cross. Spices, silk, and incense increasingly flowed through Palmyra's colonnades instead of the sick. Petra remained proud and populated, yet its grip on the incense trade slowly loosened, caravan by caravan, season by season. Sailors on the Red Sea offered another path entirely, bypassing land routes altogether. Ships could now carry frankincense and spices directly from southern Arabia to Egyptian ports. This maritime shortcut spared merchants the tolls, delays, and desert crossings that once made Petra essential. Slowly, the city that had grown wealthy guarding a land route watched trade drift toward open water instead. Across the wider Roman world, the 3rd century brought years of upheaval, shifting emperors, and strained provincial governance. Distant wars and economic troubles rippled outward, touching even remote desert cities. Petra's merchants faced unpredictable tariffs and uncertain protection along once reliable routes. The steady trade that had built the city's fortunes grew harder to sustain amid an empire distracted by its own struggles. In the year 363 of the Common Era, the ground beneath Petra shuddered violently. A powerful earthquake tore through the valley, cracking facades and toppling structures built centuries before. Temples, tombs, and colonnades suffered damage across the city. Though Petra endured, the tremor marked a turning point, leaving visible scars upon stone that had stood since the Nabatean kings. Among the earthquake's casualties lay the city's carefully engineered water system. Cisterns cracked, channels shifted, and clay pipes buried for generations broke apart underground. The dams and conduits that once tamed flash floods no longer functioned as designed. Without reliable water, daily life across Petra grew harder, and the city's old engineering triumph slipped slowly into disrepair. Let your shoulders grow heavy now, sinking into whatever holds you. Feel that weight travel down through your arms, your hands, fingers loosening one by one. Your legs follow, heavy at the hips, heavier at the knees, heaviest where your feet rest still. Let the mattress or cushion beneath you take all of that weight, so nothing in your body needs to hold itself up any longer. Christian communities settling in Petra found new uses for the old Nabatean burial chambers. Carved tombs, once sealed for kings and nobles, were reopened and reshaped into places of worship. Crosses appeared where funerary symbols once stood. The stone that had sheltered the dead for centuries now echoed with hymns and gathered congregations under Byzantine rule. By the 5th century, Petra held enough Christian significance to become the seat of its own bishop. Church officials corresponded with distant councils, and the city's religious standing grew even as its trade wealth declined. Petra's bishop represented a community still substantial enough to matter within the wider Byzantine Church, a quiet continuation of the city's long habit of importance. Byzantine monks raised a basilica within the city, its floors covered in intricate mosaic work. Skilled hands set thousands of small stone and glass pieces into patterns depicting creatures, harvests, and figures representing the seasons. Sunlight or lamplight would have caught these tiles, scattering color across the sanctuary floor. Long after the building's roof fell silent, those mosaics remained buried beneath dust, waiting. Those mosaic figures speak a language of their own, each tile chosen to represent something familiar to the people who worship there. A gazelle bends its neck beside a basket of grapes. A woman crowned with wheat stands for autumn's harvest, another wrapped in leaves for spring. Elephants and camels appear too, distant and exotic, hinting at trade routes the congregation still remembered. Every figure was a small, lasting sentence written in colored stone. Beneath the ruined basilica, workers clearing rubble found something unexpected: bundles of scrolls, blackened and brittle. They lay where a fire had swept through centuries earlier, tucked into what had once been a storage room. The papyrus looked at first like ash, too fragile to touch, yet within that char, entire sentences of ancient handwriting still waited to be read. Once painstakingly unrolled, the papyri revealed the everyday business of 6th century Petra. Deeds recorded who owned which vineyard, which storeroom, which stretch of garden near the weighty Musa. Names of ordinary citizens appear again and again, alongside witnesses and local officials. These were not the words of kings, but of families settling inheritance and marriage contracts in a city still very much alive. It was fire, strangely enough, that preserved what time alone would have destroyed. The same flames that blackened the scrolls also sealed them, driving out moisture and air that would otherwise have let the papyrus crumble to dust. Carbonized paper, brittle as a dried leaf, can outlast paper left whole for centuries. What looked like ruin was, in truth, a kind of accidental preservation. In the year 551, the ground beneath Petra shook once more. This second great earthquake struck with a force the weakened city could ill afford to absorb. Walls already scarred by earlier tremors gave way entirely in places. Aqueducts cracked, cisterns split, and dust rose over streets that had only partly recovered from the last disaster nearly 2 centuries before. After that second earthquake, families who might have stayed chose instead to leave. Farms that had fed the city fell into disrepair, and workshops closed their doors for good. Trade caravans, already thinned by shifting routes elsewhere, stopped coming altogether. Petra did not vanish overnight, but its heartbeat slowed year by year, quarter by quarter, until whole districts stood empty. What had once housed tens of thousands now sheltered only a modest remnant. Byzantine Petra clung to a fraction of the space its Nabatean builders had filled with houses, gardens, and markets. The grand theater sat half empty, its stone seats catching wind instead of applause. Even the bishop's church, though still standing, served a congregation far smaller than it once had. Somewhere far off, a sound rises and falls like breath, wind moving through a hollow space, then fading to almost nothing. It comes again a little later, unhurried, as if it has nowhere urgent to be. Listen to it arrive, listen to it recede, and let your own breathing match that same easy rhythm. In and out, arriving and receding, again and again, until even the sound seems to drift toward sleep. By the 7th century, new banners moved across the region as Islamic forces extended their reach through Arabia and the Levant. Petra, already diminished, passed quietly into this new order without recorded resistance. Administrative control shifted, taxes changed hands, and the old Byzantine structures of governance faded from use. The city that had once bartered with Rome now answered to caliphs it would never see. Under these early Islamic administrations, what population remained in Petra continued to shrink. Records from the period are thin, offering little beyond scattered references to a place once great. Wells and cisterns fell into disuse, no longer tended by hands that understood their engineering. The rock-cut facade stood on, indifferent to the passing of empires, while the last families slipped away toward other towns. Small groups of Bedouin families kept returning to the valley long after Petra's grandeur had faded. They pitched tents within the shade of carved facades, using ancient tomb chambers as shelter from sun and wind. Goats grazed along paths once lined with columns and shop fronts. No grand rebuilding followed, only a thin, steady thread of human presence woven through empty rooms that had once held thousands. 12th-century crusaders raised a stone fortress on a ridge above the valley, watching the roads below. Stonemasons cut blocks from the same reddish cliffs that had given Petra its monuments centuries earlier. The fortress walls rose thick and plain, built for defense rather than beauty. From its ramparts, soldiers could see caravans and travelers crossing the pass far beneath them. Al-Wira stood as that fortress's proper name, guarding a narrow, winding pass into the highlands. Its garrison controlled movement along a route long used by traders and pilgrims. Walls and a dry moat cut from bedrock made the position difficult to approach unseen. For a brief span, this outpost mattered more to travelers than the ruins spread quietly below it. Crusader control of the region did not last, and with its withdrawal, Petra slipped from Western memory almost entirely. European chroniclers stopped mentioning the valley by name. Maps, drawn in the following centuries, left a blank space where the rock city stood. What had briefly reappeared in written record sank back into silence, hidden behind mountains few outsiders cared to cross. Arabic geographers and historians of later centuries wrote little about the valley's older significance. Petra's name as a Nabatean capital, a Roman provincial seat, a Byzantine bishopric, faded from common memory. Local place names endured, tied to springs and passes, but the deeper history behind the carved facades went largely unrecorded. Scholars of the era focused elsewhere, and the old city's past grew thin as old parchment. Ottoman administrators, governing the region from distant offices, left almost no written trace of Petra's ruins. Tax ledgers and travel accounts from those centuries mention nearby villages, wells, and grazing rights, but rarely the carved monuments themselves. The valley existed on the margins of empire, noted mostly for its remoteness. Official memory moved on without pausing to record what lay hidden among the cliffs. Bedouin tribes living near the valley never lost track of where Petra lay. Knowledge of the hidden gorge and its carved buildings passed from parent to child, spoken rather than written. Guides knew which paths led through the narrow sick, which springs still ran, which tombs offered shelter. That oral memory outlasted empires, kept alive simply by people continuing to live where their families always had. European cartographers drawing the lands of the Levant during the medieval centuries left Petra off their maps almost entirely. Regions nearby appeared labeled and detailed, yet the valley itself remained a blank, unmarked space. Mapmakers relied on second-hand reports, pilgrim routes, and classical texts, none of which pointed clearly toward the hidden city. For those reading maps by candlelight in distant libraries, Petra simply did not exist. Let warmth begin somewhere small, perhaps in the palms of your hands, resting open and still. Feel it spread from there, unhurried, into your wrists, then along your arms toward your shoulders. Let it pool there for a moment, heavy and mild, before easing down through your chest. Let that warmth continue moving on its own, through your middle, into your hips, down through each leg, all the way to your feet, until your whole body feels held by something low and steady, like sun through a window on a slow afternoon. A Swiss traveler named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt set out in 1812, determined to find the valley that maps had forgotten. He had spent years studying Arabic language and custom, preparing for travel through regions closed to most Europeans. Local stories of a hidden ruin near Wadi Musa had reached him through earlier accounts and rumor. Burckhardt approached the region carefully, aware that curiosity alone would not grant him entry. To move safely through tribal lands, Burckhardt took on a new identity entirely his own invention. He called himself Ibrahim ibn Abdallah, a Muslim merchant traveling from India toward Cairo. He wore the dress of the region, spoke Arabic, learned over years of careful study, and observed the customs expected of a pious traveler. No one accompanying him suspected the truth beneath the disguise. Reaching the valley required a story that would not raise suspicion among his guides. Burckhardt told them he wished to honor a vow by sacrificing a goat at the tomb of the prophet Aaron, said to rest on a mountain above the gorge. The guides agreed to lead him, unaware they were guiding him toward one of the most guarded secrets of the region. His invented purpose opened a path no ordinary curiosity could have secured. His time inside the hidden valley lasted only a matter of hours. Burckhardt moved carefully, sketching what details he dared, without revealing unusual interest to his escorts. What he saw there, carved facades rising from rose-colored stone, became the first written account of Petra to reach European readers. A short visit, cautious and incomplete, still managed to end centuries of Western silence about the place. Word of his discoveries spread through the printed pages he left behind. Burckhardt's travel journals, published after his early death, described the carved tombs and narrow gorge in careful, restrained language. Scholars in London and Paris read of a lost city standing largely intact within a hidden canyon. His writing carried Petra from rumor and folk memory into the record of formal Western scholarship. Interest grew slowly among travelers willing to risk the journey themselves. The French nobleman Léon de Laborde arrived years later, along with other explorers drawn by Burckhardt's account. They mapped structures in greater detail, recorded inscriptions, and carried sketches back to European academies. Each new expedition added another layer to a picture still being pieced together from fragments. A Scottish painter arrived with brushes, rather than instruments of survey. David Roberts spent weeks among the ruins, capturing the scale and color of Petra's monuments in careful lithographs. His drawings rendered the treasury and the sick with a precision that written description alone could not achieve. Through his images, distant audiences could finally picture stone facades they would likely never see themselves. By 1839, Roberts had completed a series of lithographs depicting Petra's carved monuments in vivid detail. These prints circulated widely across Victorian drawing rooms and lecture halls, shaping public imagination of the ancient world. Readers who had never traveled beyond their own counties gazed upon towering rock facades, reproduced in fine detail. Petra became, through these images, a familiar wonder to people who would never stand before it. A phrase soon appeared that would outlive the poem containing it. The clergyman and poet John William Bergen described Petra as a rose, red city half as old as time, a line crafted for a university poetry prize. The words captured something about the site's color and age that plain description had struggled to convey. That single phrase would travel far beyond the poem itself, attaching itself permanently to Petra's name. Bergen composed his famous line without ever setting foot in the valley he described. Working from Burckhardt's writings and Roberts' published images, he built his portrait of Petra entirely from second-hand sources. The poem won its prize at Oxford in 1845, years before Bergen ever traveled to the region himself. Imagination, borrowed carefully from others' accounts, proved enough to shape how the world would remember the place. Somewhere beyond the window, a candle is burning low, its flame narrowing to a faint orange point. Watch it in your mind without hurry, the way wax pools and softens near the base. Each small flicker grows dimmer than the last, the light folding gradually into shadow. Let your own thoughts dim in the same way, one by one, until only a soft glow remains, and even that fades toward rest. Sunset changes the valley more than any other hour. The pale pink stone of morning deepens toward rose, then toward a red that seems to hold its own heat. Visitors often fall silent at this shift, watching the treasury's facade darken from blush to ember. Within 20 minutes, the whole canyon glows like something lit from within before the color drains away into blue dusk. That glow has a simple mineral cause. Iron oxide, scattered through the sandstone in ribbons and veins, reacts to shifting light the way rust answers weather. Where the iron concentrates, the stone runs deep crimson. Where it thins, pale yellow and white bands remain. Nabatean builders chose their tomb faces with this in mind, cutting doorways to catch the color at its richest hour. Reaching this valley in the 1800s required more than curiosity. Petra lay within tribal territory, and travelers needed permission from local guides before entering the sick at all. Several early visitors were turned back, robbed, or made to pay steep tolls for safe passage. A handshake with the right sheikh could open the gorge. Without one, a traveler might never see the treasury at all. Formal digging came later than the sketches and poems. Not until the early 1900s did archaeologists arrive with trowels, notebooks, and the patience for slow, layered excavation. Earlier visitors had measured facades and copied inscriptions, but few had opened the ground itself. The shift from admiring ruins to excavating them marked a new chapter in how Petra would be understood. British and German expeditions conducted the first systematic surveys of the site. Teams measured tomb facades, recorded inscriptions, and mapped the valley's scattered ruins with careful instruments. Their published reports, dense with diagrams and measurements, became reference points for decades of later study. Much of what is known today about Petra's layout still rests on these early, unhurried surveys. Mid-century brought a new institutional presence to the valley. The American Center of Oriental Research began its own excavations, sending researchers to work alongside Jordanian colleagues season after season. Their digs uncovered domestic quarters, workshops, and everyday objects that spoke less of kings and more of ordinary residents. Broken pottery, cooking hearths, and worn thresholds began filling in the human texture of the ancient city. The 1990s brought a fuller picture of what lay beneath the valley floor. Teams working near the city center began clearing the mound, long assumed to be a modest platform, only to find it open downward into something far larger. Layer after layer of packed earth and rubble gave way to steps, walls, and a great paved forecourt no one had mapped before. Workers moved earth by hand and by cart, the way excavation there had always been done, trench lines marked with string and stakes under the same pale sun that had watched the city rise. What emerged was not a shrine of modest size, but a complex of the first order, its true dimensions hidden for centuries under drifted sand and the slow accumulation of forgotten years. Brown University took up excavation of Petra's temple precinct in the final years of the 20th century. Researchers cleared centuries of wind-blown sand from the great temple's terraces, exposing column bases and painted plaster fragments beneath. Season after season, students and specialists mapped stone by stone, piecing together a structure larger than any single glance could hold. Their published findings reshaped how scholars understood the scale of Nabatean public architecture. Jordan's government moved to formally protect the valley by establishing the Petra Archaeological Park. Boundaries were drawn around tombs, temples, and quarries, once left open to wandering herds and unregulated digging. Rangers, ticket gates, and marked pathways followed, along with a mandate to balance visitor access with preservation. What had been a scattered field of ruins became, on paper at least, a single managed landscape. In 1985, the United Nations named Petra a World Heritage Site. The designation placed the valley alongside a small roster of places deemed irreplaceable to human history. International funding and technical support followed, along with new obligations for the country charged with its care. A canyon once forgotten by empires now carried a formal promise of protection written into international law. Let the jaw soften now, the way old stone settles after the heat of the day has left it. Let the eyelids grow heavy, heavier than they've felt in hours, until closing them takes no effort at all. Behind those closed eyes, there is only a soft, shifting, dark, wide, and unmeasured, asking nothing of you. Rest there a while. Let the whole face go loose, unguarded, the way a room goes still once everyone inside it has finally fallen asleep. When explaining the honor, UNESCO pointed to something rarer than beauty alone. The committee cited Petra's fusion of engineering and artistry, the way carved facades doubled as water channels, the way tombs served as flood barriers. Nothing in the citation separated function from ornament, because in Petra the two had never truly been separate. Nabatean builders had solved practical problems and made them beautiful in the same gesture. By 2007, the world was asked to vote on its favorite wonders, and Petra was among the winners. Millions cast ballots online, choosing monuments from every continent to stand alongside the old classical list. Petra's rose-colored facades appeared on posters, magazine covers, and travel brochures overnight. A city once visited by a handful of curious foreigners each year found itself named among humanity's most treasured places. 1989 brought film cameras into the sick for the first time. Petra's treasury stood in for a hidden temple in an adventure film about a fictional archaeologist's search for a legendary relic. Audiences around the world watched the narrow gorge open onto that carved facade, many unaware the location was real. For a canyon long known mostly to scholars, it was an unusual kind of introduction. The film's reach proved larger than anyone at the site had prepared for. Visitor numbers climbed steadily through the following decade, as travelers arrived hoping to walk the same gorge they had seen on screen. Hotels opened near the entrance, guides multiplied, and the local economy shifted around a steady flow of foreign tourists. A story invented for entertainment had quietly become one of the site's most effective ambassadors. As tourism grew, authorities relocated Bedouin families who had long made their homes among Petra's caves. Officials cited safety and conservation, moving households out of tombs that had sheltered generations. The transition was not without loss, since caves that had been lived in for decades stood empty afterward, their soot-blackened ceilings the only trace of the families who once cooked and slept beneath them. Members of the Bedouin tribe now live in Seyhoun, a village built specifically to house them near the ruins. Concrete houses replaced carved chambers, though many families kept ties to the valley through work as guides, vendors, and caretakers of the site. Children, who once might have slept in ancient tombs, now grow up a short walk from them, the old caves visible from their windows at dusk. Craft still passes from hand to hand within the old canyon. Bedouin women arrange beadwork and small carved stones on cloth spread across the sand, near tombs their families have known for generations. Silver jewelry, painted pottery, and woven bags sit beside paths walked by traders 2,000 years earlier. Commerce never really left this valley, it simply changed its goods. Numbers at the site now reach beyond 1 million visitors in its busiest years. Buses arrive before dawn, and the sick fills with footsteps long before the sun clears the canyon walls. Guides speak in dozens of languages, repeating names like Al, Kazne, and Dushara to travelers from every continent. The city built for caravans now hosts a different kind of crossing. 2016 brought a discovery no ground survey had caught. Satellite images, studied by archaeologists far from the desert, revealed a broad, paved platform hidden south of the city center. No visible ruin had marked its presence above the surface. It had waited, flattened by wind and buried by centuries, unnoticed even by those walking directly above it. Early testing suggested the platform came before most of Petra's known monuments. Pottery fragments near its edges pointed toward an earlier phase of Nabatean building, perhaps tied to ceremonies older than the grand facades tourists now photograph. Its purpose remains uncertain. Archaeologists have never settled what stood at its center, only that something once did. Let your breath find its own slow rhythm now, without any effort to shape it. Notice the pause between one breath and the next, that small stillness where nothing is required of you. Each exhale can travel a little further than the last, releasing more than the one before. There is only this rising and falling, patient and unhurried, carrying you gently toward rest. Radar beams sent into the ground have mapped shapes no eye could see. Ground-penetrating equipment, dragged slowly across dusty paths, returns echoes of walls, chambers, and passages still buried beneath the valley floor. Researchers studying the readings describe outlines resembling streets and structures never listed on any known map of the city. The city beneath the city has only begun to answer. Only a fraction of Petra has ever felt a trowel or brush. Estimates from those working the site suggest far more remains hidden than has been uncovered, some suggesting less than a tenth of the ancient city lies exposed to daylight. Sand, rockfall, and centuries of silence have kept the rest concealed. Petra, for all its fame, is still mostly unseen. Tombs within Petra's vast burial grounds continue to be identified even now. New chambers are found tucked behind rubble or beneath collapsed facades, their carved doorways revealed only after careful clearing. Some hold faint traces of painted plaster, others nothing but empty stone. Each newly opened tomb adds another name, shaped silence to a necropolis already crowded with the unremembered. Laser light has mapped the treasury down to its smallest groove. Teams, using modern scanning equipment, have built three-dimensional models capturing every crack, chip, and worn edge of the facade's carved columns. The resulting digital record exists independent of weather, tourists, or time itself. Should the sandstone ever falter, its exact form now survives elsewhere, preserved in light and numbers. Wind and footsteps work on Petra slowly, but they work without pause. Conservation teams track fine layers of sandstone lost each year to blowing sand and the tread of countless sandals along worn paths. Barriers and marked walkways now guide visitors away from the most fragile carvings. The same forces that shaped this valley over millions of years continue shaping it still, only faster than before. Water still gathers with sudden force in the sick, even now. A clear morning can turn within minutes if rain falls kilometers away in the highlands, unseen by anyone standing among the tombs. The gorge narrows the flow into something powerful and fast. Signs posted along the path warn visitors to watch the sky, not just the stone around them. In 1963, a flood swept through the sick without warning. A group of tourists caught inside the gorge were killed when water surged through the narrow passage with little time to escape. The tragedy remains one of the starkest reminders of the valley's old danger. It changed how the site would be watched over ever since. Engineers eventually returned to ideas the Nabateans had already solved. Modern flood diversion tunnels were built to redirect stormwater away from the sick, echoing channels carved into the same rock 2,000 years earlier. Surveyors studying the ancient dam system found its logic sound enough to copy almost exactly. The old builders, it turned out, had already answered the newer engineers' questions. Weather across the region has grown less predictable in recent decades. Studies of desert climate patterns show flash floods arriving with greater force and less warning than in the past. Petra's stewards now track rainfall models from farther away, watching hills the ancient engineers themselves once watched. The valley's oldest hazard has taken on a newer edge. Rising humidity works its way into stone that spent centuries dry. Conservation teams have documented sandstone flaking away from tomb facades in thin, papery layers, a process worsened by shifting moisture in the air. Salt crystals forming within the rock's pores push outward, cracking surfaces that survived earthquakes intact. Preventing this decay has become as delicate as any excavation. Let the weight of the day settle into the mattress beneath you. Feel your feet grow heavy first, sinking slightly, as though the bed were rising gently to meet them. Let that heaviness climb into your legs, then your hips, pressing you softly downward. Your shoulders follow, then your arms, until your whole body rests like something set down after a long journey, finally allowed to be still. Beyond the marked boundaries of the park, new buildings edge closer each year. Hotels, roads, and housing developments spread across land near the ancient site, sometimes without full oversight of what lies buried beneath. Archaeologists worry that unexcavated ruins may be lost to construction before they are ever found. The line between old Petra and modern growth grows thinner with each passing season. A dedicated trust was formed to stand between Petra and its slow erosion. The Petra National Trust works to monitor the site, advocate for its protection, and press for stronger regulation of nearby development. Its staff walk the same paths daily, checking cracks, drainage, and worn stone. Their task has no clear end, only ongoing attention. Restoration here favors patience over intervention. Teams stabilizing crumbling facades use techniques meant to support the stone without replacing its original surface, adding as little new material as possible. Mortar mixes are tested for compatibility with ancient sandstone before ever touching a wall. The goal is not to make the ruins look new, but to help them keep being old a little longer. Cameras and scanners now record what stone might not always keep. Digital documentation projects capture Petra's monuments in exhaustive detail, building archives meant to outlast floods, earthquakes, or the passage of centuries. Photographs, scans, and measurements sit stored far from the valley itself, safe from whatever the desert might still decide to do. Memory, this time, is being kept in more than one place. Some carved lines at Petra still resist translation. Linguists working through Nabatean inscriptions find phrases whose meaning has drifted out of reach, names of donors and gods mixed with words no longer used anywhere. Each new reading adds a small piece to a puzzle that has taken more than a century to assemble. The work continues, unhurried, in university offices far from the sandstone itself. The looping, connected letters the Nabateans once carved did not vanish with their kingdom. Their script gradually simplified and spread among Arabic-speaking communities across the region, its curved forms feeding into what became the early Arabic alphabet. Scholars trace certain letter forms directly back to Nabatean inscriptions found on tombs and boundary stones. A language once used for trade receipts helps shape how millions write today. Engineers studying dry climates now look to Petra's old channels for guidance. The city's carved cisterns, dams, and clay pipes solved problems that modern desert regions still face, moving scarce water without waste. Researchers in the Middle East and beyond have studied Nabatean methods when designing systems for drought-prone towns. A 2,000-year-old solution keeps finding new uses. No one agrees on exactly how many people once filled Petra's streets. Estimates drift between a few thousand and over 20,000, depending on which ruins are counted as homes, rather than tombs or temples. The city's residential quarters have never been fully uncovered, leaving population figures more calculation than certainty. Archaeologists continue debating the number, aware the full picture may never surface. New digging keeps revising what is known about Nabatean belief. Recent excavations near smaller shrines have uncovered altars and offerings, suggesting a religious life more varied than once assumed, blending desert gods with borrowed Greek and Egyptian forms. Each season's findings nudge scholars away from older, simpler theories. The gods of Petra remain only partly mapped. High on the cliffs, some tombs have never felt a modern tool. Their facades are visible only from a distance, carved into rock faces too steep or crumbled for safe access. Climbing equipment and careful rope work are needed even to study them up close, and many remain untouched, their interiors unknown. Petra keeps a portion of itself permanently out of reach. Somewhere beyond the walls, a low hum rises and fades, carried on air that never quite settles. It might be wind moving through a distant canyon or a house far off, creaking as it cools. Listen to it drift closer, then further away, then closer again, like breath moving in and out without effort. There is no need to follow where the sound goes. Let it pass by, again and again, until the space around you feels heavier and stiller and safe to rest in. Once a year, the sick is lit not by sun but by flame. Thousands of small candles line the gorge floor during Petra's night tours, guiding visitors slowly toward the treasury in near silence. The narrow walls hold the light close, turning stone the color of warm ash. Musicians sometimes play softly at the final turn, where the facade waits half hidden in shadow. Not everything known about Petra sits in a book. Local guides, many raised among the ruins, carry stories passed down through their families, details about certain paths, hidden caves, or old customs that never made it into academic surveys. Visitors sometimes hear these fragments only in passing conversation, offered without footnotes or citation. This spoken history moves quietly alongside the written record, older in some ways than the excavations themselves. Petra's survival today rests largely on those who come to see it. Tourism accounts for the majority of income tied to the site, supporting guides, shopkeepers, and the wider region around Wadi Musa. Ticket revenue funds much of the ongoing conservation work, tying the ruins' future to the steady arrival of visitors each year. An ancient trading city still depends, in its own way, on travelers passing through. Officials in Amman now weigh two duties that pull against each other. More visitors mean more revenue for guides, families, and the wider valley around Wadi Musa. But more footsteps also mean more wear on stone that has already stood through earthquakes and centuries of wind. Entry limits, timed tickets, and marked walking paths are tools drawn up in quiet meeting rooms, far from the gorge itself, to keep the balance from tipping. Teams from universities in Jordan, Europe, and the United States now share data across borders. Climate models built in distant laboratories are tested against Petra's actual rainfall and wind patterns. Engineers study how the Nabateans once managed flash floods, hoping old channels might inform new ones. Reports move between continents by email, but the questions they answer are the same the valley has always asked. Where will the water go, and how long will the stone hold? Petra remains a reference point whenever scholars discuss how desert peoples built lasting cities from scarce water and shifting trade. Its cisterns, dams, and carved facades appear in lectures about ancient engineering far beyond Jordan's borders. Students compare it to sites in Yemen, in the Sahara, in the American Southwest, searching for shared solutions to a shared problem. The city has become less a single ruin than a case study, carried quietly into classrooms it will never see. Beyond the valley walls, survey teams still walk the surrounding hills with instruments and notebooks. Faint foundations, broken pottery, and low stone walls suggest smaller Nabatean settlements once linked to the capital by paths long since faded. Not every discovery makes headlines. Many are simply logged, mapped, and left for future seasons. The desert around Petra, it seems, has not finished offering up what it has kept. No single answer explains why Petra's people eventually left. Earthquakes weakened its buildings, trade routes moved elsewhere, and water systems that once seemed permanent slowly failed. Whether one cause outweighed the others, or all worked together across generations, remains unsettled. Scholars continue to publish competing timelines, each built from the same scattered inscriptions, pollen samples, and broken walls, without full agreement on which mattered most. Petra's long arc, from crowded caravan hub to nearly empty ruin, mirrors a pattern seen in cities across the ancient world. When water grew harder to manage and trade found easier paths elsewhere, even the wealthiest settlements thinned and quieted. The stone remained standing, but the people who once filled its streets moved on, chasing rivers, roots, and rainfall that had shifted beyond their control. The city endured, only its purpose changed. Tonight, Petra sits quietly under the same sky it has known for thousands of years, its carved faces catching whatever light the moon allows. Forgotten by empires, remembered by shepherds, and found again by a traveler in disguise, it carries the whole of that long story in its weathered stone. The same moon that once lit Nabatean caravans now settles over your own window, and the same need for rest that eased those travelers long ago waits for you now. Let the valley rest, and let yourself rest with it. Good night.